Welcome to Shameless Leadership. I'm your host, Sarah Dean. This show is for women leaders who are committed to advancing both their own leadership and the leadership of those around them. In each episode, I offer practical strategies and inspiring stories to help you become a more confident, compassionate, and curious leader. The truth is, you were born to lead. So let's start now, together. Hello, Shameless Leaders. I'm so happy to be here with you today. Today, we're going to be talking about a framework that I've been using behind the scenes unconsciously for a number of years now. And then I recently sat down and put together this framework in really definitive terms, stage by stage, to map out how leaders can advance their leadership in a specific formulaic way, but also formulaic in a way that is very much customizable based on the needs of every leader. And what I realized is that I've actually been doing this for a number of years now, taking people through this process, but I hadn't given things titles and definitions and descriptions and objectives. And in doing that, I've been able to see how I can carry leaders and teams to more advanced stages of leadership with more clarity and more results-driven outcomes. And I've been putting this to work in the retreats that I've been leading, in the team trainings that I'm leading in organizations, and even with my one-on-one clients. And the results have just been amazing. So I was like, okay, I can't put off talking about this on the show for any longer. We need to be able to dig into this. And I want you to be able to look at this framework, see where you fall, and then put this framework to work for yourself. So perhaps you feel clunky in leadership, or perhaps you feel like, I don't know if I have the right skills, or I don't know if I've, built myself the right foundation. This is going to help you out. Or perhaps you work with leaders and you're like, I don't think they have the right skills and I don't think they have built the right foundation. This is going to help you out for that as well. So let's go ahead and dig in. When we're looking at leadership and we're looking at growth in leadership, there's some things that we know are necessary, and we're going to talk about those. But we also can see over time that if specific steps are skipped, certain skills not given over time, certain abilities to look at ourselves and be really critical of ourselves, for lack of a better word, but really have like strong self-awareness. If these things aren't happening as we're growing in leadership, we risk getting to a certain phase in leadership where things can start to crumble beneath us. And so we might be given more and more power, but if we don't have a strong foundation built, eventually things will crumble under that power, and everything will become at risk, and we risk losing a lot. And the stakes get higher over time in terms of what we risk losing. So my goal is for leaders to be able to build a strong foundation very intentionally through some really specific steps, through some really specific measures and objectives, so that we can be advancing in leadership in a systematic way. In doing so, we're able to bring others along with us. We are not causing harm. We are not only advancing our own leadership legacy and our own leadership goals, but we're also helping other people do the same. So what we know about leadership training, and we know about the insides of organizations, is that oftentimes leadership training is non-existent. People are just thrown into leadership roles. It almost like happens accidentally sometimes, where we're like, oh, how did I get here? I don't know if I'm qualified. And we see that oftentimes, even in organizations where leadership development is present, that leadership development can focus on skills, but oftentimes ignores or just has no awareness around in the internal work that is necessary to build a strong connection to your sense of self. So we don't only need specific leadership skills when we're advancing our leadership, but we actually need a really strong connection to ourself and a strong connection to our self-awareness and our intuition before we can leverage specific leadership skills to influence others. If we're just given skills, but we don't have the insight in terms of who we are, where we come from, what our strengths are, where we have areas for growth, then just being given skills ultimately is going to set us up for failure. We also know that oftentimes that people think leadership is about simply having authority over people, but what we recognize on the other side of that is that we have to also be considering that in order to have authority, you have to be building trust and calling people in and building a leadership legacy that causes ripples in a positive way as you're growing, because that allows you to build credibility. And it's not just about authority and having power and command over people. It's really about building credibility so that people are like, yeah, I want to listen to what you have to say. I want to follow you. It's about being able to be somewhat magnetic in your leadership so that people are joining you rather than you just advancing with this power over model of leadership that we know doesn't work in the long run, that we've all suffered underneath at different points and that we know that we can do better than at this point. So by the end of this episode, you're going to hear 4 different stages of leadership that every leader must move through to be able to lead from your gifts, to be able to bring the right people along with you, and then again, to build that credible, trusting foundation and be the sought after thought leader and advisor that you want to be, who's actually teaching other people how to also be credible, trustworthy, sought after thought leaders as well, right? So this isn't just about us, it's about this ripple effect that grows other people along with us. So let's start first with imagining a mountain. So this framework that we are working through is going to be alongside the metaphor of a mountain. So we're going to be thinking about this in terms of a shameless leadership pathway where we're going through multiple steps along the path, but we're also thinking about this in terms of a shameless leadership ascent. We are ascending up a mountain through various very intentional phases. And these 4 phases that we're going to work through are phases that do need to happen somewhat sequentially, but you can also always go back and fill in gaps where gaps might exist in earlier phases. So let's dig in. I'm going to walk you through these 4 phases, and you're going to be able to see probably where you are already doing some significant and probably really fantastic work in each of the phases. And you're going to be able to see where maybe you can fill in some cracks to stabilize and build a stronger foundation in order to make yourself more successful as you move up this mountain. So I want you to first acknowledge everything is built around our alliteration here. I love some alliteration. So I want you to first imagine our 4 stages that all start with an A. So in your shameless leadership ascent, you have awaken, amplify, advocate, and advise. So that first stage is awaken. And we're going to dig into this in just a minute, but I want you to imagine these stages as being sequential, that they do build upon one another, but they don't have to be linear, that you can move up and you can go back and again, fill in those gaps so that you can revisit stages as you need to. And as you grow, there's definitely going to be pieces in, you might move up to the 4th stage, which is advise, but still be able to do some more work and awaken as you grow and learn more about yourself. So this will become more clear as we dig into it all. So let's start with each stage. We're going to talk through what each stage is. We'll talk through descriptions. We're going to talk through kind of key learning areas in each stage, why each stage matters. And then we're also going to talk through what happens when we jump too far too fast and maybe don't build the proper foundation and things can get crumbly underneath us. And we're going to talk about what this actually why this is critical within our own organizational work. So within this first stage, awaken, let's go ahead and dive in. So the awakening stage is how you see yourself. And so when we look at how we see ourselves, we think about this as the foundation, the internal work, self-awareness, emotional intelligence. That's really what is encapsulated in this first stage, is awakening. Really connecting to who we are and recognizing, okay, I am a person who carries these gifts and talents and strengths. I'm also a person who has some certain areas to grow. I'm a person who has emotional intelligence advanced to a certain degree and again has some areas to grow there. This foundational stage is where we begin the ascent by looking inward and understanding who we are as humans, understanding who we are as our true authentic selves. So we are really forming the bedrock of the shameless leadership ascent and of this pathway. In this phase, we're exploring our authentic identity. We're starting to think through what is our personal leadership brand. We're uncovering our core values and recognizing where some of our growth edges are. We're acknowledging and understanding past experiences, personal and professional, and how those have informed who we are. We are looking at how cultural conditioning impacts who we are. So I'm recognizing, okay, if I'm a woman, if I've been socialized as a woman, how does that impact how I show up as a leader? If I've been socialized as a male, if I've been socialized as a white woman or a Black man, or all these different layers of identity. If I'm neurodivergent, if I have some other form of disability, if I'm a mom. So we're looking at how do all these layers of identity play into how we show up as a leader. This stage challenges us to think about our cultural conditioning and the impact of that, and then also look at any self-limiting beliefs that we might be carrying, also maybe looking at internalized messaging around what we kind of quote unquote think we should be in a certain place in our life or in certain roles in our lives, and then also starting to separate our truest self from social expectations or maybe feeling like we need to perform in certain ways that aren't aligned with ourselves. So in this awakening phase, we're really looking at self-discovery, values clarification. We're looking at advancing that emotional intelligence. We're looking at identifying and owning and honoring our strengths, not brushing them under the rug and not minimizing them, but really starting to recognize I'm really good at some certain things and I'm going to take responsibility for leveraging those things. We're starting to look at limiting beliefs and some of that shadow work in terms of where we might carry shame, what that inner critic might be saying to us, if imposter syndrome shows up to us, if we're someone who struggles with people pleasing or perfectionism, how past conditioning might limit our leadership potential. And we're looking at this through all different angles. And so if I'm looking at it again through a gender lens, how this might show up for me as a woman, if I'm looking at this through the lens of a male, how this might be showing up, or any other lenses of socialization. In this stage of awakening, we're also starting to look at personal leadership philosophies. So really thinking through, who am I as a leader? What is my personal leadership philosophy? And then how does that make my unique approach in leadership different from the person next to me? And what does that mean in terms of how I aspire or who I aspire to be as a leader? We're looking at authenticity and practicing authenticity as a leader. So this doesn't mean that we have to be like completely transparent with everything and, overshare ourselves, but we are being authentic to who we are as a leader, not trying to just emulate someone else because we think that that's what a quote unquote good leader should do. So in this phase, the impact of building a strong foundation in this phase is that leaders gain clarity on who they are and they create a foundation for confident, values-aligned decision-making and authentic presence. And when the people who are following us can sense this and see this about us, then they trust us, right? If they feel like we are authentic, if they feel like we are working in ways that are values aligned, then people are like, oh, okay, like I can get on board with this, right? So this matters because you can't lead authentically if you don't know who you authentically are. If you're just trying to be someone else's version of leadership, people will see through that and people will not trust you. So this part is going to be really important in terms of being able to build good relationships in our leadership roles and in our opportunities to lead in various capacities in our lives. In this stage, we are not just looking at the great parts of ourselves, but we're looking at the difficult parts of ourselves. So there's some accountability and responsibility there that can be a little bit tricky, but this part is really important because it can be rich in helping us understand who we want to become and then create space to open some doors for ourselves in terms of growing. So when we are looking at moving from the awakening stage to the next stage, amplify, we're starting to question, how do we share who I know myself to be now with the world? So let's look into that second stage then, in that amplify stage. So the amplify stage, the second stage moving up the mountain, if I'm moving out of awakening and into amplifying, I'm also thinking like, okay, I'm on this trail moving up the mountain. I have my backpack on me. So in that awakening stage, I've put a lot of tools in my backpack. I know what's in there. Like I know what I can pull from in any given moment. Like I have that sense of self-awareness to know like, okay, when things get rough, here's what I'm going to do. Here are my values. Here's my integrity. Here's where my strengths are. So then when I get to the second stage, amplify, I know that in this role in amplify, I'm looking at how do I share myself? And so in this stage, we're really looking at external communication, visibility, leveraging visibility, and taking up space. So this is really about making your leadership seen and heard in ways that are authentic to you. So this isn't just about getting really loud. Maybe it is in some ways for you, but what are the ways that you get loud that are authentic to you and not just getting loud for the sake of getting loud? So with this stage, we're looking at already having some good self-awareness and self-knowledge, and now we're starting to turn outward to amplify presence and impact. So this is about claiming space, taking up space, strategically using your voice as an extension of your values and your identity. This is about making your strengths and contributions visible to others. This is about communicating with clarity and with confidence, again, in ways that are authentic to you, not necessarily having to be the loudest in the room, but being able to communicate in a way that's effective. This is about influencing with intention and confidently showcasing your expertise. This is where you start to develop executive presence, where you're starting to be more and more aware of like, what is my messaging? How am I saying certain things? What is my body language? How do I talk in a way and speak in a way and present in a way that people will listen to me, that I am credible and that I am acting as my true self? And again, not acting as just the loudest person in the room or acting in a way that I think a leader, quote unquote, should act, but really taking up space and gaining visibility and amplifying my voice in ways that are true to myself. So in this phase, you're really refining your communication style and learning how to lead visibly in a way that is really reflective of your true inner self. So in this area, we are practicing communication in different ways. We're practicing strategic communication in different ways. You're looking at that amplification of your values and values demonstration. So this is saying, okay, I know that I value, for example, I value inclusion. So if I value inclusion, then what does that mean in terms of how I speak up, when I speak up, what I say when I speak up? So that values demonstration. It's not just identifying that I carry a value, but it's looking at how am I demonstrating that I uphold that value on an ongoing basis. These are the early stages of thought leadership. So in this amplify stage, early stage thought leadership looks like starting to share things that maybe are challenging the status quo, that maybe are a little controversial. It's maybe speaking up in places where other people are not comfortable speaking up. So you're starting to share ideas, opinions, sometimes dissenting ideas and opinions in a way that is showing your thought leadership and showing what you stand for. We're looking at in this stage at visibility when it comes to personal branding. So people are going to start to recognize that you are a person who says and does certain things, who is aligned with certain things in certain ways. This is about influencing without authority. So this isn't about, again, power over and just being loud, but it's really about developing persuasion skills, communicating in a way that you're building coalitions and you're working collaboratively with people. And they're like, yeah, like I want to go with you. They're not just following you because they're scared of you or because you're the loudest one in the room. And they're like, well, I guess I have to follow you. So we're getting creative. And creating buy-in with magnetic messaging so that people are attracted to what you're saying. And they're like, yes, more of that. I'm in. How do we go further together? In this stage, you're also boundary setting. So part of visibility is being able to set boundaries, to be able to say yes to certain things and no to certain things, to be able to know I stand for this and not for that. We're looking at voice activation. So overcoming hesitation to speak up and share ideas, again, challenging the status quo and starting to become more clear on when and how you do that on a routine basis. We're also in this stage practicing storytelling, using storytelling for impact. And so being able to use a narrative to connect and inspire and motivate people and to make ideas and concepts memorable and applicable, and also use storytelling in a way that when I'm sharing a story or sharing a narrative, it's not just for me to be boastful about a time I was successful or something that worked out great for me, but it's really about using storytelling as a tool to amplify my voice in a way that centers other people. So oftentimes we're looking at how can I use storytelling as a way to set someone else up as the hero rather than just showing a time when I was the hero. So in this stage, leaders are becoming more visible contributors who are driving initiatives forward. They're creating that forward momentum. And people are starting to see them doing that. Maybe they're shaping and shifting culture in this phase, and they're inspiring confidence in teams and in stakeholders. People are starting to pay attention. People are noticing. So this phase is really important because without this, leaders will get overlooked. When leaders skip amplify, they get overlooked because people don't know what they stand for, and they aren't able to be really clear around who you are, or people aren't clear on who you are. People aren't clear on what makes you different, what your differentiators are. So this phase is going to be really important for not only building the next step to the next phase, but also for people to really understand who you are and then how they can play alongside you and go places with you based on what you've done in that awakening stage and then how you're starting to amplify that. So in this stage, leaders are learning all about communication and boundaries and executive presence, what their kind of leadership voice is in different ways. They're looking at how they self-promote without being like weird and ego-driven, and self-promoting without being overly salesy. How can we start to detach from our ego to recognize that I'm self-promoting in a way that I am being conscientious of the greater good and not just promoting my own agenda? And so this is, again, speaking up, using your voice and having influence without that authority, having that influence with magnetic messaging that attracts people to want to come along with you. So in this phase, people are starting to listen, people are starting to follow. And once you've found your voice, now there's a newfound sense of power because you now can step into the next phase, into advocating, where you can use your position and use your power to lift up others. So the third phase then of this model is going to be advocate. So I move through awaken, and then I go into amplify, and now I'm going to go into advocate. So with the advocate stage of this ascent or this leadership pathway, you're looking at how do you bring others along with you? So when we look at old school models of leadership, it's not about bringing others along. It's about having power over. It's about that authority piece being really, really important and central. And that's not what we're looking at here. So in advocating, we're looking at how we bring others along with us so that we're walking alongside one another, so that we are working in collaboration with one another. We are not looking to have power over. So this is really about how do you use your power and platform to elevate others. This is about inclusive leadership and sponsorship, mentorship. This is about creating psychological safety. This is about how you can secure your own voice and your presence and shift focus to elevating others simultaneously. So in the advocate stage, it's about using power, position, and platform to open doors, create opportunities, and to champion the growth of others, especially those who come from underrepresented or marginalized groups. And so you might be a member of one of or more of those groups yourself, but you're also conscientious of how am I keeping an eye on the other people in the room? How am I recognizing how decision-making impacts certain people? How am I recognizing like, hey, if I make this certain decision, who is the person most likely to be harmed? How am I creating space or opening a door for that person? So we're looking at emphasizing inclusive leadership. We're looking about emphasizing intentional sponsorship and mentorship. We're looking at creating psychologically safe environments where everyone can thrive. We're looking at modeling vulnerability in this place. So if we can model vulnerability, then we're opening the door for other people to be vulnerable as well. We're also looking at empowering other people to take risks. So in this phase, in the advocate phase of leadership, we're not just doing things for people. We're not just telling people what to do. We're really empowering people to do things on their own. We're actively working to dismantle barriers so that people can go take those risks, and they can do that in a way where they have the most safety possible. And we're removing those barriers so that others can ascend their own leadership pathway, work through their own shameless leadership ascent. So in this advocate stage, we're looking at creating and maintaining inclusive leadership practices. So creating belonging, recognizing bias, ensuring equitable opportunities. We're looking at sponsorship and mentorship. We're looking at how are we advocating for others behind closed doors, not necessarily advising yet. We're going to get to that in a minute, but how are we looking out for other people behind closed doors? How are we recommending other folks? How are we using our political capital for gain for others? Again, for opening those doors. We're looking at how are we building that psychological safety by building trust, encouraging risk-taking, by creating space for authentic expression. So letting people have that space to speak up, letting people have the space to play with things in new ways, and allowing them to be imperfect, allowing people to fail in front of us, allowing space for imperfect action for other people. We're looking at empowerment and delegation. So this is really where we can also start to let go a little bit of certain things, which can be tricky in leaders. But if we've done our work at the bottom, if we've done our work with that awakening and amplifying stage, we should be able to start letting go here. So that means we're giving people meaningful stretch work to be like, hey, like, I don't need to do this for you. I don't need to have an eagle eye over you. Instead, like, I trust that you can do this. Why don't you take this thing and do it to X degree and come back and show me what you've gotten? We're showing people that we trust them, and we're resisting that urge to micromanage. We're modeling vulnerability. So we're letting people know, hey, like, here's how I failed. Here's how I just made a mistake last week. We're admitting mistakes. We're normalizing that messy middle of growth so that other people will step into that messy middle of growth too. We are looking at feedback as very necessary, very crucial, and as a gift so that we can learn. We're delivering growth-oriented feedback so that we're building capability and capacity rather than diminishing confidence in others. And we're creating pathways. And so in creating pathways, we're identifying and removing barriers and really making sure that people have what they need to keep moving forward, that it's not just about us moving forward, that it's really about how are we creating a space for others to move forward as well. So here we're starting to see the ripple effect of our own growth because it's contributing to other people's growth. We're seeing how building stronger teams builds a stronger bench and a longer bench, right? With more diverse people, with more diverse ideas, with more diverse pipelines. And we're seeing the benefit of the outcomes that come with all of that. So we're seeing here how great leaders don't just achieve on their own and individually, but really great leaders multiply more great leaders. And so this is where we start again to see that ripple. And this is where we start to see how we can empower others to come alongside us and do great things. And we're not threatened by someone else's growth, because whenever we help someone else grow, it helps us grow. So again, there's this multiplying factor and this exponential contribution to the greater good. When we've mastered bringing others along with us, then we're ready for that final stage. And so in this final stage, when we've mastered bringing others with us, we're really prepared to grow others in a way where we're not just opening doors and saying like, hey, here, I'm going to give you this opportunity to go out there and shine, but we're really giving strategic guidance, coaching, and accountability. So in that fourth phase, advice or advising, we are conscientiously growing others. So we're not just advocating for them and opening doors for them and saying like, hey, I think you can do this, but we're giving that strategic guidance. We're giving that coaching and accountability. We're asking them great questions. We're making sure that we give them the tools, but then we're also saying like, hey, I'm going to give you this tool and I'm going to check back with you next week and I need to know how it's going. So we're looking at, as part of our own leadership legacy, how are we developing other leaders who develop more other leaders? And so there's really this constant multiplying effect and constant exponential growth. So this summit phase, this last phase of advice or advising, leaders become the architect of other leaders' development. So advice is about providing that strategic guidance and accountability and frameworks so that others are navigating their own leadership journeys in a way where they're starting to bring others along with them. Again, it's layering on top of layers here. So this stage requires wisdom and discernment and the ability to balance challenges and support together and at the same time, simultaneously. In this phase, leaders serve as more advanced thought leaders and trusted advisors and coaches and thought partners, subject matter experts. They're asking really powerful questions. So they're not just saying, hey, you should do it this way and only giving that advice, but they're asking powerful questions that allow other leaders to grow in their capacity. They're providing really honest feedback and holding people accountable to reaching their highest potential. This is the legacy building work. In this phase, we're developing leaders who go on to develop leaders. We're creating sustainable leadership and leadership excellence. So here we're working on coaching skills. We're working on strategic accountability. We're working on feedback mastery. We're working on consistently having hard conversations because we understand the growth that comes from hard conversations. We're looking at leadership development planning, or maybe even looking at succession planning. We're looking at systemic thinking, and we're looking at constantly sharing wisdom. So here leaders are creating self-sustaining cultures of leadership excellence where leadership development is embedded into how the team or the organization operates. So this is a sustainable culture of growing leadership. And here we find, again, moving into that coaching and advisor phase, we find that leaders are in that phase of high-level thought leadership and possibly high-level subject matter expert as well. But it's not just subject matter expert, like I can talk about a certain skill. It's like I can talk about the skill of leading. So I'm like subject matter expert in thought leadership or in leadership itself, and moving into that to a more and more refined degree. So now let's look at, when we know these four phases, when we know awaken, amplify, advocate, and advise, what happens if we have leaders who just try to go to the top? So oftentimes, if you're put into a high-level leadership role, you assume like, okay, well, I'm here to like be in the advise phase, right? That's oftentimes what we associate or connotate leadership with is, well, I'm the leader, so I should be telling people what to do. I should be the advisor. even if I don't feel qualified, even if I haven't been given the skills, even if I haven't been given the proper training. So we can all think of leaders that we've worked with who were in that place of having that power to advise, but they had no self-awareness. They had clearly not done their work in the awakening phase or in the amplifying phase where they were strategically using their voice in, intentional, thoughtful, values-driven ways. So what are the risks when we have someone who goes right to that advice first leadership role, right to the top of the mountain? We see someone who has authority, but they're not credible. We see someone who's louder, but not better. We see a gatekeeper instead of a door opener. We see someone who is giving advice, but not with empathy or context that builds trust in a way that people are wanting to follow along. So this might be fear-driven leadership where people underneath are like, well, I have to follow this direction. I'm afraid of this person, or I'm afraid of the consequences if I don't, but I'm not necessarily wanting to follow them. I'm not feeling inspired, motivated by them. So basically we end up here now in a place where we're perpetuating toxic systems of leadership, where we're perpetuating what we often see in common culture as, male dominated spaces where people in dominant systems and dominant groups have the power, but they don't necessarily have the following or the loyalty or the trust that is crucial for them to actually have leadership where people want to be walking alongside them, where people want to be part of what they're doing. And when we have that kind of leadership, which we're all accustomed to, we probably all can think of examples of this, we can tell that there's great costs. So there's no trust in the leader. There's very poor psychological safety. There's very homogenous leadership pipelines. There's high turnover. So everyone's just operating in fear and they're like always one foot out the door or getting ready to leave or like planning their exit strategy. There's toxic cultures disguised as quote unquote high performance. There's major burnout culture. So people are constantly burnt out. They don't feel positive. They don't feel good about what they're doing. They're not inspired or motivated. They're just like there to collect a paycheck and get some benefits. And they're trying to figure out what their next step is. They're tired. They're exhausted. They don't want to be there. They aren't invested. They're just trying to figure out their next steps. And we also see with this organizational reputation damage, and even maybe a litigious workforce. And so I've seen this in multiple situations where when we only have this advice-driven model of leadership where they're in this advising and power over authority mode, we can end up with a really litigious workforce because there's such a toxicity in the culture of the organization that people start to see the cracks and they're like, oh, like what's happening here maybe isn't even legal. There can potentially be a lot of discriminatory behavior and a lot of discriminatory systems and patterns happening where people are like, oh, like I'm going to get out. I'm going to figure out who else was in the situation with me. And I'm going to make a claim. I'm going to go and report this. I'm going to do something about this. I'm not going to stand for this. So this gets really, really dangerous. So what I want you to look at for yourself now is let's assume that none of us are just going right to that top, right? We're not going to that place of that toxic leader. We want to really start from the bottom. I want you to start to think through, where are you on your ascent? Where do you have work to do? Is it in that awakening phase? Is it in amplify? Is it an advocate or is it in advise? There's probably work you could do in any of the phases. So thinking through awakening, do you feel like you're performing leadership or are you really embodying it? Do you really know who you are? In amplifying, are you holding back your voice and holding back taking up space, holding back contributions? In advocating, are you actively opening doors for others? Are you actively looking at how am I growing others alongside me? How am I bringing others with me? And then in advising, how are you developing the next generation of leaders? How are you building your leadership out in a way that it is a multiplying force? So you might be really strong in one area and struggling in another. That's totally normal. You might recognize like, oh, wow, I do have a lot of power in my role because maybe I've been here for a while, but there's work I could go back and fill in the foundational phases that could really help me. The goal here is never perfection. It's always just about growth, progress, and progression as you go. So when we're thinking about this in terms of what this looks like, when we see this kind of leadership development in organizations, this looks like leadership development programs that are built on awareness and tools, that are built on getting to know yourself and practicing specific skills. We're looking at team growth and learning opportunities that help everyone in the organization understand where they're at and where they're going. We're looking at creating a common language for leadership across the organization. And we're looking at building leadership pipelines that are really intentional and inclusive and set up for everyone to grow in leadership in whatever capacity they need to. Organizations with strong leadership development are going to retain talent longer because people are going to feel inspired and motivated and excited to be working alongside leaders who are part of the system. Teams with leaders who will operate in those advocate and advice stages are going to have higher engagement, which means they're going to have higher productivity and better outcomes. So when we're looking at this framework, we're looking at how we can address the gaps that most leadership development is missing. And then from there, build systems that work better, that can replicate themselves, and that can really grow in the long run. So if you're like, wow, I'm seeing some things here, I'm seeing some holes maybe in myself, within my team, within my organization, let's talk. If you are a leader and maybe you have a certain title, but maybe you haven't done certain kinds of work, you're seeing like, okay, I have some work to do. Maybe you're recognizing, oh, wait, we have leaders in our organization who have some work they need to do. So how can we start to address where we need to be filling these gaps and where we need to be doing this work? This isn't just about having a framework in place, but it's really about how can we figure out where I need to be doing work within the framework to reveal where those leadership gaps are, and then how we can fill those gaps so that we build a sustainable and thriving culture. So if you want to talk more about this framework, if you want me to help you dig into it, I would love to talk. I'm actually working with multiple leadership teams in integrating this into their leadership development programming in 2026, and it's been really fun to start rolling it out. I've also been working with one-on-one people and helping them roll it out as well. So if you're looking for individual work in this capacity or group work, let's connect, let's talk. You can always find me at hello@sarahdean.com. I want you to think about where you are in your climb, where you are in your ascent, where you want to go, and what are the gifts of putting in the work to grow the way that you want to grow? And then what are the costs if you don't? What are the costs if you don't put in that work? I know that just doing a little bit of work on yourself will give you exponential returns in terms of how you will be able to lead in a more productive and purposeful way. So I want to invite you to think about where you can take one step in one of these phases in the coming days and weeks in order to, again, fill in those gaps where you have some room for growth and then see the greater outcome at the end of your work. So thank you for being here. I'm excited to continue to talk about this framework on the show. And until next week, know that I'm in this with you always. Thank you for allowing me to spend time in your ear today. If you liked this episode, be sure to subscribe to this channel. To learn more about my speaking, training, and coaching services, visit sarahdean.com. That's SARADEAN. I would also love for you to connect with me on LinkedIn at sarahdean.com/LinkedIn or on Instagram at sarahdeanspeaks. I love hearing from my listeners. Thank you for showing up for yourself today. I see you, I hear you, and I'm holding space for you today and every single day.